Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Return of the Archon Drukhari content on 6++. I am Tom, the very lowest of men, and I'm back after a really wonderful day playing 40k in the Winchester RTT run by Mark Vickery down the road from my parents this weekend just gone. So for me, it was a real opportunity to play one of the new Grotmus detachments, and obviously I went with my favourite one, which was the Reaper's Wager, the brand new Drukhari Harlequin combined arms detachment. For the Dark Kin, which is a really awesome set of tools. I've covered it in our Grotmus detachment review if you want to read through the ins and outs there. And we've also obviously covered the thoughts of a bunch of Drukhari experts in our conference video, which you can also check out if you'd like to get our initial thoughts. But this was the time to actually field test some things, field test some concepts, and try playing a list. I wanted to try a couple of the more edge case options and try a few cute plays here and there as well and just see how they got on. And I think there was a lot of space for optimizing the list more and lots of really useful lessons from the event itself. So what we'll do today is to take you through what I ran, what my initial thoughts with those things were, and how I was intending to use them in the detachment. Then we'll get through the games, all the different learnings on the fly in the event itself, and some takeaways from that. Anything that you yourself might be able to apply if you're looking to use Reaper's Wager out there in the UK going forwards as well. So let's start with the list. So in terms of my list, in my assessment of the terrain pack for the Winchester RTT, was a little bit concerned there might be some quite substantial firing lanes. In the event, I was actually not correct on this. I think the central terrain was used very effectively and the lines have been set up very well to avoid massive blowout lanes. But I went a little bit heavily into lone ops just in case, and obviously I had a decent smattering of guns as well. I actually think I could skew this list a little bit more towards combat and be perfectly happy with it. But with that said, let's look at what we use because it's a sort of early sounding board of different options for Reaper's Wages. So obviously we are in the Reaper's Wages detachment. We have an Archon. He is upgraded with Arch Raider, so he's going to be in a Scout Move 9 moving Raider. And we have Urian Rakarth. I really like Urian Rakarth as a scoring and bait piece in Drukhari. I think he's just as good in Reaper's Wager as he is anywhere else. He is a piece that you can shove out, score cards with. If the opponent commits to deal with him, they have to commit 2 phases worth of output. And he's really hard to kill for his points. So I absolutely love Urian Rakarth. We've got a Cabalite unit that's going to split via the Venom, which we also have. So we've got a Raider for the Scout and a Venom to split the Cabalites because they are going to go partly on the backfield and partly in a Court of the Archon. So Court of the Archon with a Archon and Cabalites. Obviously, this is a flexible shooting and melee unit. It gets lethal hits innately. So I was optimistic that with lethal and sustained in the detachment, this would be a really interesting and powerful tool. Obviously, the Scout move on the Raider also enables you to reach out and sticky an objective turn 1 and give you some early pressure and board presence. So I think this is a really flexible tool. It has fights first. It's all singing, all dancing. I really enjoy the Court of the Archon. If there's a drawback, it's that it's expensive and relatively fragile. I think those are the only potential issues with it. But as we'll see, I found some uses with the Raider, and I certainly enjoyed using it. Next up, we've got my Anvil. So 12 Grotesques in 2 packs of 6. I am finding Grotesques phenomenally useful for Drukhari at the moment. They are very difficult for the opponent to hurt, especially at range. Guns simply do not do the job trying to get through them. There's very few types of damage that are actually efficient into Grotesques. So they can absorb a very disproportionate amount of hurt, and that lets your other units play the game. So these 2 units are my primary bullying units. I will typically send them towards my opponent's side of the board, bullying their sort of safer objectives and bullying the midboard. And in the chaos that creates, I will then use my other units to better effect. Now, I enjoy the Grotesques as well for combat because Fight on Death 4-up is really good with pain tokens as well. All-round all-stars, absolutely love Grotesques, can recommend. We've also got a little unit of Hellions. I wanted to try running a 10-man. This was probably one thing I didn't take out of concern about the boards. With hindsight, I'd have definitely run a 10-man of Hellions. I think the 5-man were great. This was typically my rapid ingress threat. I would use them sneaking around the edges, ingress them when the opponent was getting vulnerable in round 3 so they could sneak in the back, take back objectives, do late cards scoring. And I found them very, very useful, and they are deceptively dangerous these days. Again, they can have sustained and lethal on them. They can be a really punchy unit. So big fan of the Hellions, and would definitely try running a 10-man in the future. Next up, we've got the Scourge. 2 units of Scourge. Scourge are very expensive now. I am loath to spend too much on the backfield presence of the Scourges, so I went for just the 2. I'd be interested to try some lists with 3, but I found 2 very good. I had one squad with Dark Lances and one squad with Haywire. Now, we'll talk about this later. Haywire is really very good in the new detachment. The Dark Lances are good too, but I'm definitely increasingly an advocate of Haywire Scourge in the overall game and meta at large at the moment, but that's an interesting conversation to have. Next up, we have a little bit more of the Anvil force. So we have 2 units of 2 Talos. They too have Haywire Blasters, Liquefire Guns, and they have the Damage 3 Talos Gauntlet. I really like Talos. I enjoy them in Real Space Raiders. I think they are deceptively durable. They are hard to duel with for gun tanks, because what will often happen is they'll pop out, hurt a tank, the tank will shoot them back, maybe kill one Talos, then the second Talos wins the duel. They're also very good in combat, and once they've killed a unit and they get the always empowered effect, they are very, very good. Now, Talos love this detachment. They love being able to advance, shoot, and charge. That's a massive, massive boon for them, because their speed was one of their main issues. And yeah, they're excellent. So they are still vulnerable. They will die, but they bring an awful lot of different profiles and weapons and problem solving to a list. If I'd had time to hobby, I would definitely have run 6 rather than 4. I think they are a unit you can go all in on and be fairly happy. Talos and Grotesques are sort of the anchor for the list, and then damage around it is a really good combination that I'm a big fan of. Next up, we have the Harlequin. So, Harlequin contingent was shaped a little bit by what I had to hand. I was definitely always going to run 1 troop with the Troop Master using Reaper's Cowl, so you get a big forward deploying troop brick with lots of fusion, lots of melee, lots of dev wounds. And I'm a big fan of the Solitaire too. The Solitaire really benefits from the Reaper's Wager and the rerolls available. 1s to hit and 1s to wound is a big deal on the Solitaire. It, again, loves the stratagems. It loves being able to turn off Overwatch in a crucial moment. And it gives you a certain kind of reach and option that you don't otherwise have. The fact that it's a lone op also means you can use it out on flanks for early scoring in a way you can't other things. So I quite enjoy the Solitaire, and it will typically dance along a flank, scoring points and cards if it needs to, before then making a push for their safer objectives and causing problems. I think my one issue with the Solitaire is just that it eats a lot of CP to use him well, and probably you'd rather be spending those points on other things. So we've also got the Death Jester here. The Death Jester was purely to have a lone op. He does a little tiny bit of shooting, but it was mostly to have another lone op for scoring. And I would say probably the Death Jester was the least effective thing in this list, not giving anything too much away. And I do definitely wonder whether actually just having a second troop would be better than both those guys, and just going even further into the sort of the massed bodies and massed invuns and feel no pains and other things. Both really fun to play with though, and we got some good stories out of them at this event, so definitely worth covering it. So that's the list. I think it's heavy on primary play. It's a little light on secondary scoring. And I think one thing I definitely found using it was I need to be very careful with my secondary game to make sure I was getting the points. I won on the primary every round, but the secondaries were definitely a little bit of an issue. So I think there's probably an adjustment to be made there, or at the very least a little bit more practice to get a sense of the rhythm of where units need to be and when, in order to get the absolute most out of them on the scoring. So that's the list, and I guess the best thing to do now is going to be working through the games as they happened, and looking at the results and talking about them as well. So let me just get my rounds up from BCP. Okay, so if we go down to that, I was right down on table 29 for this one, so let's share this tab instead. So we should now have my games up. Yep, so for round 1, I was paired into the lovely Conrad Herrick. Now, Conrad was quite new and was playing Space Wolves, so this game was a bit of a blowout. I think the primary learnings for this were just the sort of damage and agency this list can have against armies that don't have good ways to reach it and punish it. So Conrad's list had a couple of Thunderwolf sort of units. It had Ragnar with a unit of Bloodclaws. It had a number of smaller melee trading units, and then a Redemptor, a Wolf and Dreadnought, and Bjorn the Fell-Handed. So it's quite standard Space Wars, but not really skewed hard enough into any one direction, I don't think, and lacking in particular ways to reach out and dig me out from multiple different places at once if the Thunderwolves were struggling to get places. So in terms of the macro strategy of this game, my approach was to push one flank very aggressively. We were playing on linchpin, which means there's big end game scoring for whoever is in control of the board, and there is very generous primary if you can get a good foothold in the mid board. So I got first turn, which meant it was important that I had to dominate the mid board, cause massive damage to the Space Wolves and put the list away before the late game to avoid a late swing back from Comrade to catch up on points. I'm obviously trying to push the differential as much as I can as well, keep my team hat on at all times. So Reaper's Cowl Harlequins were deployed on my safer flank, and the Scout Moving Raider then pushed up to secure that. So I pushed a lot of stuff on one side. It's very important to get at least one flank locked down, and I then used my Grotesque, my Talos, my more durable things, and my Scourge to harass and push Conrad's safer side. The Dreadnoughts were very easy to pick off, with Haywire in particular just deleting a Dreadnought every turn, making it very difficult for Conrad to recover and leaving him with no shooting to really whittle me away at a distance. The court obviously made one side basically unattackable because the fights first was too much for any of Conrad's combat units to go into and do a lot. And the Grotesque essentially ran into his melee on his safer side and traded both in my turn and in his, with using Fight on Death and other things to ensure there was no win-win for him there as well. Ultimately then, in the late game, I was able to ingress the Hellions in to take his back objective, and the Solitaire ran up that way as well to join the party. Which meant that this was a pretty comprehensive win. I did drop 3 points on a secondary at the start of the game where I was saving for a CP. That perhaps is an early sign of an issue I was going to have, where the biggest issue that Reaper's Wager has is command point generation. The primary concern here is that you always want to be using the strats to get the most power from the detachment, but you also want to be scoring your secondaries. So you get caught in a bit of a bind and have to choose very carefully when to throw away cards and when to actually use strats, particularly the sustained and lethal hits, which I was very, very, very keen to jam the yes button on at all times. But you have to weigh up every single lost, dropped secondary very, very carefully. And that's a lesson I learned over the course of the event. So Comrade was lovely to play, really good game to sort of try the detachment out initially, and I very much felt the raw power and the potential of it. But there were definitely things I needed to work on too. So going forward into the second round, I was drawn into an excellent opponent from Newbury who had a very lovely time playing against Connor McNamara. Now, Connor was playing Imperial Knights, and Connor had Melee Cerastus, an Errant, and Canis Rex, and then a series of the Armigers as well. Calidus Assassin, and Watchmaster Artemis guarding the back, which I really like. A little tech of him getting back up again if you try and take the backfield was really sneaky. So we were playing on Terraform, and our map was quite open in the central objectives, so anything on those was going to struggle not to be shot quite a lot of the time. Ultimately, this is an interesting game because this highlights both the power of the Drukhari detachment and its points of weakness and its points of vulnerability, and the same for Imperial Knights. One of the things I always say about Imperial Knights is they are a knife-edge army. They will put you on a knife edge where if you're able to drop the big knights, you can get yourself in a very strong position in the game. But if something goes wrong, if there's a sort of shortcoming or a bounce and they start picking up your anti-tank, you can suddenly find yourself in an extremely precarious situation. And that was very much how this game played out. Connor was very daunted by the Haywire at the start of the game, and things started off quite well. He deployed very defensively, very carefully. I was still able to get Haywire into Canis Rex and do, I think, 15 dev wounds to him in the first turn, which set the scene for the power of Haywire Scourge into a vehicle matchup with the sustained hits. And Connor, having gone first, was in a position where he really needed to force the issue. If he'd gone second, I think he can win this game by simply holding off and controlling it as he did. But going first, he's in a really difficult situation because I can always swing to some primary at the end if he's passive. And if he pushes into me, I have a lot of Haywire, a lot of ways to massively hurt the knights. So what happens here is he plays very carefully. He locks a ton of OC onto his safer objective to secure an early terraform, which I am not in a position to prevent. And he keeps the big knights just out of reach to avoid me putting too much hurt on them straight away. I put a lot of dev wounds on Canis. I charged the Harlequin brick into his melee, Cerastus, and do, I think, 15 dev wounds. The Harlequin troop really impressed me. That unit is very, very scary. Again, at killing specifically vehicles and elite things. So from that situation, I think Connor was very worried about almost a turn 3 tabling. But then we had a very funny interaction that caught me out. And the key here was that in my next turn, as I pushed my court out, the goal here being to kill Canis, kill the Cerastus, hopefully kill an Armiger as well, and then be in a very strong position in the game. What ended up happening instead was I spent my pain tokens to juice up ready to do this, then had a slight whiff on one little knight, and crucially, forgot that when you kill Canis Rex, you do not get an additional pain token. So that made things very, very scary because Canis doesn't count as dead until Sir Hector is dead. I fired one solitary Dark Lance from the court at Sir Hector. I hit him, I wounded him. He saved it on a 6 because he was in cover. That then put me in my go turn in a really rough spot because my game plan had been predicated on killing Canis Rex, getting a pain token, juicing up the court, and then killing the Cerastas. If I get the pain token, I'm very confident this happens. I didn't, so it doesn't. And then suddenly, and this is why Imperial Knights are beautiful, suddenly you're in a very scary spot. If you've not done it right, they are then in a great position. Because what Connor was able to start doing was hoovering up my damage dealers, my Haywire, Talos in particular were getting picked up gradually. The Grotesques were dying slowly enough to buy me time. But I was now in a position where I was very much on the down, and the rate of attrition was very high. I'd not had great cards, and again, the issue I was finding with Reaper's Wager was not wanting to spend CP to throw cards. I needed to do it more, probably once or twice a game now, and I will make sure to do it in the future. But that meant that I was in a precarious spot. So I was able to win this ultimately by winning on the primary. I managed to get Urian onto the mid-board at a time when Connor was unable to get there and deny him, which meant even if he shot Urian to death, I would still hold it, thanks to him getting back up again. And I was also able to block off his big knights from hitting my safe side using a wall of Grotesques. Hellion snuck in the back and ultimately picked up Hector and scored me some cards, and I was just able to sneak away in the final turn on the last card. So this one was fascinating because it went from a very comfortable win in the first couple of rounds to me being greedy, misusing my resources, and slightly overspending on pain tokens. This is a textbook Drukhari error. It's something I've done many times, and I snuck into it here. Now, if I'd remembered the thing about Canis Rex, I wouldn't have been in that position, but I also had other options. I didn't need to try and go for knocking out both big knights that turn. I could have held back, held my resources, and waited for later on. So I had ways around this that weren't as risky, and ultimately those are decisions that I chose to take. Now, Connor was a fantastic player. He really played the hell out of that list and made it extremely hard work for me. And I think we both learned an awful lot and had a really good time. So that was a fantastic game. For the final round, I was then drawn into Simon, who is Adam Shepherd-Jones's brother from Beachhead Brawl. Wonderful guy, really lovely lad. Now, I've got my injured leg, so I was a bit knackered, sore leg, a little bit tired by this point. So I can only apologise to Simon if I drooped off a little bit towards the end of this game. But we had a fantastic match. Now, this was Drukhari versus Black Templars. And we were playing on Scorched Earth, but a 6-objective Scorched Earth. Now, 6 objective missions are my undoing because I'm such a natural primary denier as a player. That's what I always seek to do. 6 objectives will lose you so many resources trying to do that. And it makes it very hard to sustain that rate of attrition all across the game. So that was something where I think I needed to play the macro a little bit differently in this game, and I didn't adapt as much as I should have done. Simon's list had 2 Gladiator Lancers, a Land Raider Redeemer, an Impulsor. It had bricks, a massive brick of Sword Brethren with Hellbrett, which is a fantastic unit with the 5-up field no pain, tons of wounds. It had a smaller unit of Sword Brethren with a Judicia. Then it had a couple of Scout units and Emperor's Champion with Assault Intercessors and some other Assault Intercessors kicking around at the back. So it was a beautiful thematic Righteous Crusaders list. Really cool. Really, really liked it. And it looked amazing on the tabletop as well. I would say on lists, this is an interesting one because I have a lot of tools to hurt the Templars, especially my shooting will pick up the tanks. But what I don't have is any single sort of killer activation for dealing with Hellbrecht and his squad. And that was ultimately going to be one of the challenges in the game, was navigating that big killer brick. In terms of the overall macro approach, I went for quite an aggressive... I used a couple of trading pieces early to kill off Simon's scouts to wing his secondary scoring. I pushed to deny his primary and get up on primary for the end game because I went first here. I think I'd have preferred to go second. This is one of those where the end game swings of being able to burn objectives late is really powerful. So I had to put pressure on. I applied a lot of pressure. I think I had a couple of moments where Haywire and Dark Lances pinged off of tanks that I was hoping to kill. And I think this was one where perhaps I was greedy at times, trying to kill 2 tanks in a turn where I needed to make sure I killed 1. My entire game plan of removing Lancers and Redeemer took a lot longer, to the point that he still had a Lancer at the end. So I think that was partly errors of allocation from my part, partly a little bit of misfortune in Haywire devs and Dark Lance saves and wounds and things like that. But this is one of those games where Scourge didn't quite do the god killing that I know they're capable of. I needed to then adapt and play differently to manage this. Simon took his out in this game, which was basically pushing his melee forces to the middle of the board and trying to score the cards and win and get enough primary by just keeping things tight in the middle of the board and pushing with Hellbrecht's Brick and his Emperor's Champion and other things. And he did that very effectively. There were go turns where I struggled to get through Helbrecht's Brick and left the Emperor's Champion on a couple of wounds, which then meant he was able to sort of secure his side for a little bit longer, and that kept the Black Templars in the game. And so I think I had finished the game just slightly up on primary, but losing on secondaries. Again, I'd had a situation where I hadn't drawn the cards I needed at the beginning, and I didn't swap cards out. And I then settled on just a 4 turn on secondaries later in Engage and Cleanse. And that was on me for simply not keeping track of the secondaries and making sure I was ticking over well enough on that. I think probably in both the second games, I was in a rush to do damage and inflict casualties, and I could afford to be more patient and focus on score and make sure especially that my secondary scoring was keeping pace with the opponent, because I had a lot of units to control the game. I had a lot of ways to avoid fighting them until it was on my terms. And I think in this game, Simon grew into the game very effectively, weathered my early storm, and then survived at the end by just about getting home on his secondaries. So this was a fantastic game. I really, really enjoyed it. I think both armies had good assets for hurting the other. I think probably Drukhari still have a very nice edge on Marine, so all credit to Simon for digging in deep and playing the game and being as hard to beat as he was and getting the win. A very well-deserved win to finish the event 3-0. So for the Drukhari, that places us, I think, 13th overall, with 2 wins and a loss, and decent scoring all the way across. So I think that invites some reflections on Reaper's Wager to finish up. And I think what I would say is it's a very powerful detachment. It can do incredible damage. It is very capable of being very hard for the opponent to interact with, and it takes a whole bunch of Drukhari units to new levels in terms of their output. Full rerolls with sustained and lethal, as we know, is a very powerful thing. What Reaper's Wager struggles to do is apply all of these things consistently across the game, whilst also managing its secondary cards as well, because ultimately these things all cost CP, and Reaper's Wager has limited CP. It doesn't have extra ways to get them, doesn't have free strats, it hasn't got any of those kinds of application. So I think in the short term, Reaper's Wager will require a bit of practice to really get the most out of. I was definitely repeatedly not quite managing my resources right. You're always wanting to pop lethal and sustained in places, to get the most out of the damage, but actually Drukhari damage is already good. So I think playing cautiously, conserving resources, focusing on scoring the early game and getting into a good position is key. And then it's a little bit about composition of units. As far as the Harlequins go, the Solitaire is a good unit and absolutely can and does sneak in places, score your cards, flip primary. It is expensive. It requires massive investment in CP and positioning to actually use it effectively. And ultimately, once committed, it dies. And there isn't really a world in which it doesn't. I think in that sense, a second troop brick would probably be a better asset, more flexible all round than the Solitaire. Not quite as glorious, not quite able to reach the same places, but more in line with the all-in sort of primary bullying that the list, I think, is good at and capable of. So I think 2 troop bricks alongside Grotesques and Talos feels like a really nice base, and then it's building your scoring and your precision shooting around that to really bully the opponent and get a leg up in the game. It was very good at the primary. I won the primary every game. I need to adjust and find slightly better ways to play to get the most out of the secondary play. And that ultimately is going to be the key thing to mastering this detachment. I'm really interested to see where it sits in the overall meta. It felt very good into vehicle-heavy lists, to the point that I'd be tempted to just focus on the Haywire and accept that if you hit some Tyranids or Demons, those are already tough matchups. So maybe don't panic about those and focus on what it's good at, which is bullying and Space Marines and mech and other things. I don't think it's a meta-topping list, but I think the Drukhari and very good Drukhari players will definitely get results with this. I think it definitely has a lot of juice. I think people will not be as ready for this as they are for other things. And I think there is a lot still to be discovered here. Obviously, Harlequins themselves will get new rules potentially when the Eldari book eventually comes out, so there may even be a second lease of life for the detachment then. But I'm definitely excited to see where Reaper's Wager goes next, and I'm fully anticipating us to see some Archons out there having a good time with it and achieving some very impressive things. That's it for me today. If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. If you're interested in getting Drukhari coaching and working with me at 6 Plus, we'd be more than happy to have you. So drop us a message and let us know. You can come to our Discord, links in the description, and come and find us and get coaching there. And if you want to support the channel, all the wonderful content we're making, then you can sign up as a YouTube member now and give us a little bit of money towards our many, many goals as well. Thanks so much for your time. I'll see you again very soon. Lowest of Men out. Bye-bye.